Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work. This is your host, Dan Turchin, advisor at Insight Finder, the system of intelligence for IT operations, and CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. Thanks again to all of you, our loyal listeners, for making this one of the most downloaded podcasts about the future of work. If you enjoy what we do, please like, comment, and share in your favorite podcast app. And we'll keep sharing great conversations ad-free. The future of work is quite obviously distributed teams working remote or perhaps hybrid. We're in the process of testing generations-old beliefs about how and where work gets done. One of the most fascinating trends is watching entrepreneurs do what we always do: find opportunity in chaos. New technologies from AR and VR to the avatar-based metaverse to digital offices are proving that geographical boundaries are artificial. Today's guest is one of those entrepreneurs defining the future of work for remote teams. Matt Compton founded Filo.co last year to help remote teams interact in virtual spaces, to recreate that kind of intimacy of live internal events like, say, sales kickoffs. It's a crowded space, but Filo.co is off to a great start with customers like Anaplan, Techstars, and Yext. Before Filo.co, Matt co-founded Waysay and served as the SVP of Revenue Operations at Cheetah Digital. Matt also has the dubious distinction of being our first guest from Indianapolis. Go Hoosiers. Let's jump in and learn how an entrepreneur with a bold vision is solving an important problem and in the process defining a new market. It's my pleasure to welcome Matt Compton to the podcast. Matt, let's get started by having you share a little bit more about your background.
Yeah. Hey, Dan. First of all, thank you so much for having me on. Really, really appreciate it and excited for this conversation. A few things to know about me that kind of tee up how we even got into what we do in building and Filo. First one is that I'm a problem solver by nature. So that, while that sounds like a bit of a brag, my wife would probably tell you it just means I get bored really, really easily and have a hard time staying on task, which is probably more true than I care to admit. But it's why I became an engineer. It's why the career trajectory of starting out maybe being a sales development person and going into marketing events and then leading the events team and taking over demand gen and eventually becoming a CMO is not the career path I've taken. Started out as an engineer, moved to sales, moved to operations, two-time founder. And it's really just because I really love complex problems where I have no idea what the solution is, and don't have the skill set to do it. It gives me opportunity to learn something new. As soon as I get to where I feel like I've mastered something and I can hand it off to somebody else, it's time to do that and move on. So that's just naturally how I'm wired. And then the second one, you mentioned Indianapolis. I've never lived in New York City or San Francisco, and absolutely love those cities and try to travel to them anytime I can. But grew up on a very small farm in the middle of nowhere in southern Indiana. Went to undergrad here. You said go Hoosiers. I'm a Purdue guy, so in the northern part of the state, and then moved to Arizona where I was on a global team for IBM. And then my wife and I moved to Durham, North Carolina for grad school, and then came back to Indiana. So I share those two things because it's solving complex problems, really hard problems people don't know how to solve. And I've never lived in a place that people naturally come to me, which means that my entire career has essentially been spending 3 weeks out of every single month on planes, flying to cities just to be able to get in a room with 5, 10, 15 people, just to hash out a hard problem, figure out a solution. Then we go back to where we're from, and then we start to implement that solution and come back together the very next month. So while that can be good for a small period of time, I am also a big family guy. My happy place is sitting in my backyard with my 2 kids and my wife with something on the grill, reading a book. So you combine all those things together, and 3 weeks out of every single month traveling, loving to solve hard problems, but also wanting to be here with family. Just spent a bunch of time thinking there has got to be a better way than having to be on planes and in hotels and eating bad food throughout my entire career. We had been ruminating on this with some other co-founders and investors that I've worked with throughout my career, including executives and CEOs from ExactTarget and Salesforce. And then when everything happened last year, we were kind of gifted this amazing petri dish of, hey, let's come in, and we now have a big test bed to try to solve this. We had a use case that was for us that was very near and dear to our heart we got started on, and I'm sure we'll jump into that here in a little bit.
And go Boilermakers.
there you go. Thank you.
Should have known you work from Bloomington, so I jumped the gun there. I mentioned some of the great customers that Filo.co has signed up. Tell us a customer story. Who are you most proud of?
Yeah, I'll share two. The first one is just how we got even started and the use case we got started, because we're a little unique in that we weren't even trying to start a company. We were just trying to solve a problem. And then I'll talk to you probably about, since we actually formed the company, one of the biggest customers and how it transitions from one thing to another. So we got started, and I had been working with a group called High Alpha, which is a venture studio based out of Indianapolis. They do traditional venture capital investing and a capital side, and then they've got a studio that starts companies, right? They start companies for a living. They've started 30, 35 companies over the last 5 years, all tech startups, a lot here in Indianapolis, but also around the United States. And they do all of that through a process called Sprint Week. And what Sprint Week is you take 80 people, there's about 40 to 45 people that work at High Alpha, every single one of them, marketing people, executive assistants, the partners themselves, finance people, product designers, as well as 20, 30 different industry experts, investors in different areas. You come together for an entire week, and you show up on day one, you're introduced to your team that you don't know ahead of time, you're given an idea, and you have 4 days to turn this high-level concept with this team you've just been introduced to into a full-fledged company that you pitch on day 4. You identify the problem, you interview 30, 40, 50 prospects or customers in the space. You identify how you're going to solve that problem, how you're going to sell it. You actually develop a clickable prototype over 3 or 4 days. And at the end of day 4, you're presenting to a room of 100 to 150 people this concept of a new business. Well, there's 4 teams that do this during Sprint Week, and it's a competition. At the end, they pick a winner, they match it to an entrepreneur, they form the company, they drop a little bit of pre-seed money into a bank account, and you're off and running. And that's how they've started all 30 plus companies over the last 5 years. That whole process has been very much in person. You show up, you have 20 people on your team, you lock yourself into a room for 15 hours a day for 4 straight days. At the end, you actually get a chance to sleep and go home and take a shower and all the things that you would do. Well, like everybody, we had one scheduled in May of last year. Like everybody in March, when everything got locked down, we're now forced to say, how do we do that when you don't know the people, you don't have a plan of how you're going to execute, you don't even know what problem you're solving? It's 15 hours a day, and now all of us are working from our bedrooms, our kitchens, our offices. How are we even possibly going to get that done? We had decided to cancel it. I was going to join for the Sprint Week. We were going to cancel the Sprint Week, so it's just not possible. We had been talking about this issue, I said, around problem solving and having to jump on planes. And luckily, one of us, I don't even remember who it was, asked the question, gosh, why can't we solve this? We've got 4 weeks. Do you think we could build something in 4 weeks that allows us to actually have this type of collaboration virtually? If so, look, let's try to build it. We had 2 engineers on staff that we could pull off a project. Let's try to build it. And worst case, we're going to learn something. We may fall flat on our face. We're going to learn a whole lot. Best case, who knows? Maybe there is a company out there, but that wasn't our focus. So we said yes. We spent the first week identifying what it was we were going to build. We spent the next 3 weeks building it. It was very much duct tape and nails and boards, just trying to hold this prototype together. Ran Sprint Week on it, and ended up being the most successful Sprint Week they had ever had in the history of High Alpha. They had never started more than 2 companies out of a Sprint Week before, and we started 4 companies. So when we look at that, we ended up with 5 teams. We started 4 companies out of Sprint Week, and those are 4 startups who are employing hundreds of people today that would not have existed if we hadn't built this prototype that ended up becoming Filo. running Sprint Week on it. So it's hard not to start there because that's something I'm incredibly proud of. From there, afterwards, it worked so well, and we had partners come in, people got exposed to what we were doing, came to us and started asking, gosh, can I use that for everything from to run a virtual conference? It's an educational conference. It's super collaborative, to things like sales kickoffs, to Techstars, who actually became our very first paying customer, who said, I have a 3-month version of what you just did in 4 days. I would love to run my entire accelerator on this. And we decided, gosh, maybe we do have something. We formed the company and we were off and running. So that's one I'm very proud of. Probably when you think of our entire customer base, the one that is one we always get very pumped up talking about is Anaplan is a very good customer of ours, just a phenomenal group of people. And when they came to us, we were only about 6 months old. We were this tiny little team that had only been available or around for 6 months with this tiny little product. And they were planning their sales kickoff at the beginning of the year. And they said, hey, let me tell you why we would spend millions of dollars running this event in person and flying everybody to San Diego or wherever they would have it. They said, our kickoffs aren't just show up and watch people present on stage. There's a bunch of companies that can help us do that virtually. We need those messages. But there are also opportunities for our sales teams to tell stories to one another, to talk about the big deal that they won, the big deal that they lost, challenges they're having in the field. Time for different leaders around the organization to run workshops around new pricing and packaging and messaging, for teams to get together on their own, which may be not just all of North America, but 20 people on the North America New Business East team who get together and collaborate on what they're going to do for the coming year. Partners come in and run workshops over the week about how they implement Anaplan with some of their key customers, which is a huge learning opportunity. And they said, we have no idea how we're going to do this virtually. We've got an event platform we've already bought. We've looked at a bunch of them. None of them can do the level of collaboration we need. We showed them what we had. They said, gosh, I think this would be perfect. Took some advocating internally to get them to sign up for a startup that was 6 months old. In a month and a half, we pulled off everything that they wanted to pull off. It was 1,600 people, ran 24 hours a day for 3 straight days to support Europe, North America, and APAC. And from there, afterwards, it was a one-time contract. They signed up for an annual agreement, and now we're helping them solve a bunch of problems internally. So we've been truly blessed to get to work with customers like those. But that was probably one we're most proud of.
So across the Sprint Week, Techstars, Anaplan, et cetera, what would you say is the one feature that sells a customer on Filo that they can't already get in Zoom?
It's a really good question. I can't say one. I think if you say one, it greatly simplifies things. There are 3 things that we identified, and it went back to that original Sprint Week, because we said, look, we have 3 weeks to really build a product. We have 1 week to figure out what we're going to build. So we really need to narrow in on what it is we're solving for. So we did a bunch of interviews. We probably did 100 interviews of stakeholders during that first week, and identified 3 things that when you go virtually kills collaboration. One is not having a structure to engage within. So Zoom is phenomenal. It's one of the best video. It is the best video product I've ever used in my life. I've been a customer of theirs for 6 years. I've been a reseller. I've been a partner. We're building our business on top of it. But you think of structure of Zoom, you have a Zoom link, and maybe somebody else can send you another Zoom link, and then you click and you're in talking with somebody. It's a tunnel to talk to them. But when you're in person, just having a room, or maybe an overflow room, where a table is, how chairs are situated, where whiteboards are, the fact that you can see everybody all interacting in different conversations, just having that structure of, even what do I do in the morning if I don't know where to go? Well, I go to the room our team's working in, and I'll see another team member, and that'll start a conversation and lead somewhere. That's the first piece. We said, we've got to solve for giving people a structure to engage within, instead of just a big open white canvas. The second one is visibility, because you can have that structure all day long, but if that structure is just a bunch of Zoom links and you don't know which ones are live and who's talking to who and what conversations are happening or who's even available, that's a problem, because I roll out of a meeting, I've got 5 minutes, I want to engage, I have something to be able to say, I need to say to somebody. how do I find them? How do I inject myself in? So the second's visibility. And then the third is just making it incredibly easy to start a conversation, whether it's joining an existing one or whether it's spinning one up one-on-one. The act of, hey, I'm going to Slack Dan and say, do you have 5 minutes? And they wait for a response. And if you respond, I'll spin up a meeting and then I'll send you the link and then we'll click in. That may only take 2 or 3 minutes, but that's enough that most conversations virtually become 30-minute calendar invites that you're now talking days later, which just slows everything down. So those are the 3 things. We said we got to provide structure, we got to provide visibility within it, and we got to make it a second or two to be able to get on a true conversation with somebody. And if we do those, we think we'll have something interesting. And it's, yeah, that premise is played off.
So this idea of these sophisticated virtual places, maybe like you said, beyond Zoom, but we're now getting exposed to a lot of really interesting technologies that have solved some problems that we now take for granted as business users using them. What do you think is the hardest technical problem that you and the team have solved?
The hardest one for us is visibility. So out of those 3, because to provide visibility of what's happening across a virtual space, we give the flexibility to build it out however they want. And that isn't that hard. It's just having a really good designer, which we're lucky to have, and some good front-end engineers to help make that possible, making it easy to connect. There's APIs to do that. But what does visibility mean if we're running a 5,000 person collaborative event that's going to happen over 3 days versus a space for a group of 20 people to work very intimately together in a very haphazard way over the course of, say, a 3-month accelerator? The visibility in both of those things, 1, they mean something very different. 2 is the technical challenges of, if you have 5,000 people all doing things in a single space at the same time, being able to take all of those events, ingest them, and get them out to people with such little delay in a way that browsers can be able to handle is a really interesting scale challenge that we first have to design what it means. Second was, okay, how do we do this and build it for scale from day one? Because, within the first few months of even being a company, we'd have 5,000 people hitting this thing all at once. So we didn't really have the luxury of kind of slowly scaling up, because like us, and like as you and a lot of people out there, everybody was trying to figure this out last year and had big problems to solve. So that's really been the most interesting technical challenge that we've had to overcome.
So let's assume that apps like Filo will be omnipresent in a decade. It'll just be how we work. We won't even think about it as remote work. We'll just think about it as work. What are some of the other attributes of that workplace of the future, even call it a decade into the future, that you think it might be commonplace, but for today might just seem like science fiction?
It's such a good question. When people ask, like, okay, what is a workplace of the future? And if it is things like science fiction, almost everybody, it's interesting. It's just how we're wired as human beings. Everybody goes to some virtual manifestation of what we experience in real life, right? So whether it's VR and AR and being able to be in a room, like an actual room, just a digital representation of that room, and being able to walk around, I actually don't think the future is going to look anything like that. I mean, there'll be times and there's use cases that I think as a point solution, it could be good. But what that does, and we've seen it in a few customers who have tried doing it, it takes a bunch of barriers that exist in the physical world and limitations that exist because you have a physical space with things that need to be built, and it just transitions them to digital. So where you think you can get the best of both worlds, many times you just end up with actually the worst, like the hardest part of both worlds, and you're taking the burdens of both of them on and trying to make something productive. I don't think it'll look anything like that. I don't think it'll probably look anything like anything we have today. But there will be digital places for people to come together. I think you're going to see so many more jobs, not just tech jobs that are going to be able to easily be done virtually, but whether it's in service industries, whether it's in manufacturing, I grew up on a farm, whether it's farming, being able to come in and do all of that virtually because you can immediately teleport yourself to where you need to go but having places that there are people there to engage within. It's not just going to somebody's website where maybe there's a chat bot on the side that I can be chatting with a bot until I fight with it enough that I can actually get a human being on the other side, but being able to show up, immediately be talking to a human being with a structure to be able to engage within. I also think there's going to be, personally, I think there's going to be a or maybe two winners out of it. So there's going to be standardization, which will allow all of us to quickly switch between contexts. So if you think of everybody has, multiple contexts that exist in their life. There's a family context. There might be, if you're religious, there might have a church, you might have a nonprofit, you have a set of friends, you have your work that you're working on, you have boards that you're sitting on, and being able to instantly switch between those contexts into different places and have all of them working together in a way that you're not having to figure out who's using which video and which link do I have, I think is a world that we're going to have. I think sooner rather than later. It'll be measured in single-digit years rather than too far down the future.
Share your perspective. In fact, I think that things like the Jetsons seem quaint. The Jetsons world isn't supposed to take place for 40 years, but we think about flying cars and robot dogs, and it's like quaint. That feels like we're almost there. And in a few years, I think we'll be talking about those being in the rearview mirror. And I like your notion of kind of these digital contexts that make it very easy to, travel, almost like, flu powder and Harry Potter, if you were the kids or Harry Potter fans. But, that notion of, being able to be a global citizen and interact with anyone you care to interact with. I firmly believe in any language, in any time zone. I think those are the kind of barriers that come down as kind of, AI becomes pervasive, and all kinds of physical boundaries become, readily easy to permeate with digital technology.
It's also why I believe there's going to be a movement of standardization of where this stuff exists in the future. Now, what that standardization looks like, does that mean there's going to be a Facebook-esque company who's going to be the dominant person who's going to rake in all of the money and take ownership? Or is it going to be much more distributed with everything that's happening with blockchain and the next version of the browser that really democratizes it for everybody? But if you think right now, we have so many different amazing point solutions that help us solve individual problems in our lives. We've got things, in basics, you got video like we're on right now, talking over Zoom. You've got chat, and you got Slack that's sitting out there. That's the best chat that I've ever used. It's an incredible product. You have product management, and we use Asana, but there's a bunch of products out there in order to do that. You now have combined some of those, and you have video, asynchronous chat, and then you have companies like Loom who step in and build an amazing product and make that easy to do. But until you get standardization of how all of these things click together into somebody's life, or once you get that, that's when you really get interesting in how you can overlay AI and things that will help make all of our lives easier, right? To be able to know what's next for us, what's coming up next in your calendar, have everything right there, all the people available to you. It'll be real interesting.
So one of the concerns I have is when these digital workplaces, or like your example, a sales kickoff, when that becomes the new work pattern, I feel like the ones who are disadvantaged are junior employees who have historically relied on those kind of serendipitous hallway moments or the open door policy, things that happen outside of a sales kickoff or something on the calendar. What's your coaching to that kind of generation entering the workplace that just doesn't have the same advantages or opportunities for serendipity that maybe you and I have?
Yeah, that is a good question. The first I'll say is there are definitely things that you lose when you go virtual, and there are things that you gain when you go virtual. When you're in person, it is just easy and natural for connections to be made because that's how we've existed for so long. You see somebody and it kind of forces a conversation between the two of you. real meaningful conversations happen virtually, but you can't just throw people into a place with a bunch of Zoom links and then say, hey, we're going to do speed networking and it's going to drive all this connection. Those things just don't work. What drives real connection virtually is jumping in and solving problems. I'm obviously biased. I'm a problem solver, but when you get involved, when you first come into an organization, hopefully you're part of an onboarding program that just starts to introduce you to different parts of an organization. Identify things people are working on. Don't just reach out and say, hey, can I grab 30 minutes to just pick your brain and meet? But instead, figure out what they're working on and say, can I get 30 minutes? I've worked on something kind of close to something you're working on. I'd love to pick your brain and see if I can learn from you, and maybe I'll have some ideas. Let's have a discussion. And those things will can form such meaningful connections. That means the next person, next time that person goes to tackle a problem, you're on his or her mind. They will reach out to you, and then those things are going. So that's the first, is just get involved in one way or another to help people do what they're doing every single day. The second one I would say is probably flipping what you said a little bit on its head. I actually think, while in the short term, they may be disadvantaged because they got to figure out how to fill this gap that overnight became a huge gap in organizations. I think they have such a leg up on the rest of us. And that if we think the pandemic was a big turning point in what remote work was doing, there's another one that has been slowly building. And I think we're at a big inflection point right now that I think will have an even bigger impact on how we work going forward. And it's the fact that we're kind of at that point, about half of the workforce has built up of what Christopher Lochhead called digital natives, right? So you have digital natives versus, I think I was at the very tail end of an analog native, where I did not grow up with all the connectivity we have today. But now you think of people who their digital life is actually ahead of their analog life. That's how they're built to connect with people. That's how they've connected with people and built relationships and maintained friendships their entire lives. And we're at that inflection point right now that as that becomes the majority of the workforce, they're going to have such a leg up of adapting to this new way of working. They're going to be so much more flexible. They're going to be so much more comfortable building relationships without flying to get into a room to be able to see them, that I think we have a whole lot to learn from them. So the other piece of coaching I would say is, lean in and help teach us, help guide us, help be a part of solving this problem of how we do this without somebody from Indianapolis having to fly to San Francisco to solve a problem. And in doing so, oh man, everything's going to get better.
That's great advice. That's inspiration. I hope a lot of employees in that generation are listening and receptive to your coaching. So let's talk a little bit about this amorphous term called the metaverse. And, Zuckerberg and lots of others have gotten us excited about this idea that your avatar will live in this parallel universe. And, there are no disabilities, there are no speech impediments. Everyone kind of lives in this utopian digital universe. I didn't hear you say anything about an avatar or about, this kind of virtual workplace. It's more about just extending the traditional workplace to kind of a place where all the digital barriers are removed. How do you reconcile, that concept of the metaverse with what you're building in Filo?
I don't spend a whole lot of time. Trying to reconcile them. It's a good question. I'll say, I think it comes probably just because of being wired as a problem solver. I just think so much stuff happens when you can really solve real problems. So right now, the way we can do that, I don't think you're going to have this avatar. I think humans have a need to connect, right? They have a need to get together. They have a need to have relationship. I don't think that is going to go away. I just don't think you should have to be physically together in order to get work done. Right. So if you just project that into the future, I think very near future, there will never be a reason why you have to jump on a plane in order to get a job done. What there will be is the want to jump on a plane to be able to sit down so that Dan and I can sit at a table over breakfast with coffee or lunch and or go take a walk or have a shared experience that will help us bond in a personal way. I think that will continue. Now, God willing, we get on the other side of this pandemic and it becomes much easier in order to do that. And we're looking forward to that as much as anybody else is. What we're just looking forward to is where you don't feel like you have to. You don't have to leave the people you have a personal bond with, your family, your kids, and take yourself out of that life in order to go and solve a problem. So that's probably one way I differ. I think we'll actually see, if you look in our lives and you look at how companies get work done, there's all these things where play and work are combined together. And we have this history of, and this conditioning of saying that those things are supposed to go together. Take a sales kickoff as one, right? You get a sales kickoff together and think about how this works. We get everybody together. Most people stand on stage the first day and say, hey, I hope you're prepared over the next 3 days. You're going to get a fire hose of information. And everybody kind of chuckles and looks at each other. And then they go out the first night, everybody goes out to dinner and they have wine and they have drinks, and then they go out to parties and they socialize and they limp back to their hotel rooms at 4 a.m. and they get 2 or 3 hours of sleep. And then they show up, 4 hours later to the beginning of the day, and they're expected to ingest all of this really important information about how they get their job done. That's just a terrible idea, right? So the personal part of that is really important. But I think what we'll see going forward is companies who say, we're going to fly people to a location, but it's just to hang out, right? Because we can build bonds that way and we can build relationships. But the actual work, consuming information, collaborating together, solving hard problems, setting a path for the future, we can do that virtually. It's easier. It takes less time. It's less disruptive on the environment. We can build better teams that way. So I think we're going to end up somewhere in the middle. But again, maybe that's because I'm at the tail end of a native analog rather than a native digital. So we'll see.
Hey, Matt, we're about out of time. I got to get you off the hot seat, but not without asking you one last question. So a few weeks back, we had a great entrepreneur named Nilima Paraskar on the show, and she started a software company called Snap It Solutions in Kansas City. And we were talking at the end of the podcast about what it meant to be an entrepreneur in the Heartland. And I mentioned at the top of the show, you were our first guest from Indianapolis. Convince the audience, who is mostly, I'll put myself in the category of a bunch of navel gazers in Silicon Valley that think we have the monopoly on money and talent. Of course, we don't. Convince us that great companies, you're 2X entrepreneur, great companies can be built anywhere. Go.
It's first of all, the Bay Area and Silicon Valley and New York and Austin and Miami and all these other ones that are popping up and just really growing are just incredible. Like they're just these meccas of thought and problem solving that are amazing and will live on and have such value associated with it. The same thing can be done in the Midwest. You just need the right ecosystem and the right support system. I am very lucky in Indianapolis that there are predecessors who fought a lot of the really hard fights, who were the ones who were building businesses without the funding ecosystem, when people were still saying they're not going to invest any money in the Midwest when everything should go into the coasts. And they were the ones who said, that's not true. There's such amazing people here, thoughtful people here, hard workers. And, Scott Dorsey built an incredible company called ExactTarget. Peter McCormick and Chris Baggett, that to solve email marketing. They built it in Indianapolis. They did all of the fight to get the funding and grow it. They grew it, have an amazing exit to Salesforce in 2013, which then became the Salesforce Marketing Cloud. That then were blessed. That led to a bunch of funding that came into Indianapolis as a whole. Salesforce, Mark Benioff, kudos to him, who put a stake in the ground and said, there's some incredible talent here. We've got an awesome university ecosystem. in just the Midwest and especially in Indiana. There's really something here. He then built the second largest hub in the United States for Salesforce. And then that just gives more talent. And then that funding goes into new startups. And then you have the mentors to look up to that the generation before me didn't have. So all it really takes are those first jumps, right? Those first wins. You start to get momentum, and then that just feeds on itself and builds. So, entrepreneurism, willingness to solve problems, hard work, that exists everywhere, has a slightly different, maybe a slightly less arrogant mindset to it that I enjoy. But you know what? I'm also not one to say we can beat the coasts either. I like having big brothers to look up to, or sisters.
Such a diplomat, Matt. I hope we get you back on the show and we get to hear an update on Filo's progress. And I assume that when we talk next, you'll be either the mayor of Indianapolis or at least on the Chamber of Commerce.
I don't know if I got that in me. Let's just start on this business now. Dan, real pleasure meeting you. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Matt, just a pleasure. Really good getting to know you. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Before we let you go, anything else you'd like the audience to know about Filo, where to learn more?
Yeah, check us out, philo.co, so FILO.co. You can also find us in the normal social channels. We very much right now specializing on collaborative internal events, but really our entire business has been driven by companies who say, I have this problem, I need to solve it virtually, I don't know how. And we've got an amazing group of people who just jump in and love solving those problems. So reach out, we'd love to talk to you.
Matt, we're all rooting for you and the company to succeed. So all the best, and great having you.
Thanks so much.
This is your host, Dan Turchin, signing off this week, but back next week with another fascinating guest.